For this part of the tutorial, we are going to walk through a lesson in the Teacher's Guide and related components. First, let's understand how the contents are organized. There are 5 proficiency levels that are divided into 8 units. The red level contains Units 1 to 4. Units 1 and 2 are for beginning students, and Units 3 and 4 are for early intermediate students. The blue level, covering the intermediate proficiency level, contains Units 5 and 6. The yellow level covers the remaining 2 proficiency levels and units. Unit 7 is for the early advanced level, and Unit 8 is for the advanced level. All the units follow the same basic format. Within a unit are 4 chapters, and within a chapter there are 2 to 4 lessons. Each chapter in the red level has 4 lessons. A blue level chapter has 3 lessons, and a yellow level chapter has 2 lessons. Before you begin using the Champion program, you need to know the proficiency level of each individual student, so students of the same proficiency can be grouped together for instruction. You can use the results of a formal language proficiency test, such as a state English language proficiency test, to identify the proficiency level of a student. If such results are not available, use a Champion Tester placement test, which can be found on the CD-ROM. We will look more closely at the different placement tests in Section 4, Placement and Assessments. Once you know the proficiency level of the student, begin instruction with the unit as shown in this chart. Beginning students start instruction in Unit 1, red level. Early intermediate students start instruction in Unit 3, red level, and so forth. Before you begin instruction, review the language objectives for the proficiency level you are teaching. The language objectives are identified in the Champion Teacher's Guide at the beginning of each proficiency level. These objectives are organized by domain: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The objectives are based on a cross-section of state and national English language proficiency standards, including WIDA standards. These objectives are also identified in the actual lessons themselves, and we will be looking at that closely later. For the purpose of this tutorial, we will be looking at sample pages from the blue level, the intermediate proficiency level. The language objectives can be found on pages 22 through 24 in the Teacher's Guide. You will see that under each domain, we have listed objectives that you will find in most state and/or national English language proficiency standards. For example, the listening language objectives require students to listen accurately to information presented in groups and identify, analyze, and evaluate important details and concepts by using both verbal and nonverbal responses. Take the time to study these language objectives so you know what students are expected to do within that proficiency level. Every chapter begins with an overview chart like this. This chart is from Chapter 18 of the blue level. Remember that a chapter comprises several lessons. This chart gives you the information you need to plan the chapter. The teaching time is based on 50-minute class periods. An additional period is needed for end-of-chapter evaluation. The target vocabulary for all the lessons in the chapter is organized by parts of speech. Students are introduced not only to noun vocabulary and other parts of speech, that is, verbs, adjectives, prepositions, and so forth, but also more sophisticated academic vocabulary and content area words. Here, you will also see the different figurative and idiomatic language that students will be learning in the chapter. The chapter overview chart also lists the 3 selections from the Champion Reader and Champion Library. Flesch, Kincaid, and Lexile scores are provided for selections in the Reader. Below that are additional recommended readings related to the chapter topics. In the red level, a chapter includes 4 lessons. Each lesson revolves around a reading selection. The first 3 lessons are from the Champion Reader. The 4th lesson revolves around a reading from the Champion Library that the teacher reads aloud. There are a different number of chapters in the blue and yellow levels. In the blue level, each chapter includes 3 lessons. The first 2 lessons revolve around a selection from the reader, and the 3rd lesson in each chapter revolves around a reading from the Champion Library that the teacher reads aloud. In the yellow level, each chapter includes 2 lessons. The lessons revolve around a reading selection that is divided into 2 parts. The first lesson focuses on part 1 of the reading, and the second lesson focuses on part 2 of the reading. There is no Champion Library for the yellow level. Now let's look at one lesson in detail. The sample lesson is from Chapter 18, Lesson 2 of the blue level. Each lesson begins with a lesson overview chart that identifies the approximate teaching time and the resources needed from the program components, as well as other materials such as chart paper, markers, and so forth. Following that is the list of target vocabulary organized by parts of speech. Each lesson follows a 3-step lesson plan format: warm up, connect, and extend. Each section, warm up, connect, and extend, includes a short description of what the teacher will do in the activity. The language objectives listed here refer to the 4 domains: L for listening, S for speaking, R for reading, and W for writing. The numbers refer to the unit language objectives found at the beginning of each unit that we just looked at. So let's look at the first objective, L1. What is L1? All the language objectives are listed at the beginning of the proficiency level. So, for example, in this case, on page 22 of the Blue Level Teacher's Guide, L1 states that students should be able to engage, listen, and respond appropriately in social conversations. In the lesson overview chart, you will also see specific functions and forms addressed in each part of the lesson. What are functions and forms? The function is the action, such as comparing and contrasting, and the form is the type of language used. For example, when comparing and contrasting, we often use adjectives and the comparative form. Let's look at each part of a lesson in detail. The warm-up section is where you, the teacher, models new behaviors and skills while introducing the reading topic and target vocabulary and concepts. This is the time you tap into prior knowledge to help guide instruction. The activities in this part mainly emphasize listening and speaking skills. This warm-up section creates a low-anxiety learning environment and encourages student participation, both verbal and nonverbal. At the beginning of a new chapter, students create an assessment portfolio where they will collect the work done in that chapter. This portfolio is a critical part of the formative assessment at the end of a chapter. In general, the warm-up section ends with a presentation of the target vocabulary list, which can be found on the CD-ROM. The resources on the CD-ROM can be projected onto a screen and printed for each student. Give each student a copy of this vocabulary list. Students will be assigned some or all of the words for homework. The next part is the Connect section that links and expands the oral language from the warm-up to the literacy domain of language while focusing on grammatical accuracy, higher-order thinking, and more sophisticated and complex language and language structure. You connect the new behaviors, skills, vocabulary, and concepts students learned in the warm-up to the material they will read in the Champion Reader or Library. Students read from the Champion Reader or Library. The activities in this part emphasize reading comprehension and development of grammatical proficiency. Generally, instruction is explicit, and you play a key role in bridging social language to academic language. In the Connect section, students receive explicit vocabulary instruction. students work in groups to define target vocabulary through pictures, pantomimes, and words. The champion reader is an important component of this section. Students will preview the reading selection and utilize pre-reading strategies to access the text. Following that, you will read the selection aloud, or have students listen to the audio CD of the reading. For the second and third reading, call on students to read a paragraph, providing corrective feedback for pronunciation. Encourage students to ask questions to clarify meaning at the end of each paragraph. Ask comprehension questions to check for understanding. For the fourth reading, have students read silently or in pairs. There are many reading strategies provided in the teacher's guide to help students access the text. Strategies for pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading include previewing the text and graphical features, predicting, connecting to real life and prior knowledge, asking and answering who, what, when, why, where, how questions, retelling and summarizing, sequencing, character and setting study, and main idea and details. Let's take a look at the features in the Champion Reader that help make the text accessible to English learners. This is a sample reading from the Blue Level Chapter 18, which is for intermediate students. Every reading includes colorful, vibrant pictures of the people, places, and events students are reading about. At the end of each reading selection are comprehension check questions that assess students' understanding of what they read. Following that are the Make Connections questions that encourage students to relate what they are learning to their own lives. There are many other readability features in the Champion Reader that you can learn about in Appendix A of the Teacher's Guide. This appendix is available online. Please see the table of contents in the Teacher's Guide for details. The Connect section also emphasizes the development of grammatical proficiency. Current research points to the need for explicit grammar instruction. The Teacher's Guide provides the support you need to teach grammar explicitly. There are multiple opportunities to build and reinforce the grammatical structures students learn through the worksheets in the Champion Writer. For example, Activity 20 focuses on students being able to use the irregular past tense correctly. Activity 24 gives students practice using subject and object pronouns. Finally, the Extend section provides a variety of opportunities for students to apply the language of the chapter to their own lives, their personal experiences, insights, and understandings, primarily through a written mode. Students engage in activities that build on the vocabulary, concepts, and grammatical structures they have been learning in both the current and previous lessons. The emphasis here is on research, writing, and presenting. Instruction is student-centered and includes both implicit and explicit teaching approaches. Students are presented with rigorous content and activities to promote academic language acceleration as well as preparation for content area classes as the proficiency level increases. Students are introduced to the writing process and the different genres of writing. Activities in the Extend section include group work, research presentations, oral and written presentations using graphic organizers, rubrics for self-assessment, and other various learning aids. For example, after reading a narrative story in Chapter 18, students learn about the elements of characterization and use a graphic organizer to compare and contrast the two main characters. Following that, students are introduced to the different genres of writing and write their own narrative that features one main character. The process is guided by the teacher with clear and explicit instruction. Following the writing activity, students go through the editing process using the checklist on Guide 4. At the end of the chapter, students take an end-of-chapter test in the Champion Tester. Each student should have their own tester to record their answers. The teacher follows the administration instructions exactly as they are written in the teacher's guide. Answer keys to the test can be found on the CD-ROM. Most of the test parts are group administered. However, the speaking subtest is individually administered. It takes about 1 class period to administer the test. There are other assessments for ongoing monitoring embedded in the program, and we will look at that in more detail in the next section on placement and assessments.